55% above market value, Colton Reddick announced, clicking to a slide with my full salary projected behind him, as if I were a line item he'd caught stealing. 19 executives turned to stare. I didn't shout. I didn't crumble. I simply felt something inside me shift. Quiet, cold, final. He thought humiliating me would save his margins. He had no idea what he'd just unplugged from the heart of his company. If stories like this hit close to home, stay with me. And if you can, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. For 13 years, I built the backbone of Ridgepoint Systems without ever needing anyone to clap for me. I managed the relationships no one else could hold, the crises no one else could calm, and the revenue streams Colton Reddick would one day pretend were simply the result of market reputation. I knew every factory that depended on us, every operations manager who called me at 2 a.m. when a production line froze, every CEO who trusted me enough to hand over contracts worth tens of millions because they believed I would keep their world running. That belief wasn't something you buy or benchmark. It was something earned slowly in moments that never made it into quarterly reports. I spent years doing what most people never see: rewriting supply frameworks during snowstorms, renegotiating freight corridors before shutdowns, teaching clients how to avoid equipment failures that could bankrupt them. Ridgepoint didn't grow because we had the cheapest pricing model. We grew because the people who relied on us knew I would not fail them. That knowledge came from experience, not branding. Yet inside our headquarters, the farther I climbed, the more invisible that work seemed to become. The board praised our consistent growth trend. Analysts called us a stable mid-size logistics leader, and Colton, long before he even arrived, was the kind of executive who believed revenue was created by spreadsheets, not relationships. I felt the shift the moment he first toured the building. He didn't ask what we did well. He asked where we could cut. He didn't ask how we retained $5–10 million in annual contracts. He asked why operations salaries were inflated. I'd survived 3 CEOs, 2 recessions, and more supply chain breakdowns than I could count. But nothing unnerved me quite like the way Colton looked at people. As numbers, not assets. I kept doing my job because my clients needed stability, and I wasn't going to let a cost-obsessed newcomer disrupt what I'd built. Still, there was a gnawing anxiety in the air, quiet but sharp enough that longtime managers whispered to each other in hallways, "He thinks he can rebuild the place from scratch." What none of them said out loud was the truth we all felt. Executives like Colton don't actually rebuild anything. They strip what works, slash what they don't understand, and justify the damage with buzzwords. Didn't know yet that he would choose me as his opening demonstration. But I did know one thing. People like him never see consequences coming until they're already drowning in them. Colton hadn't even warmed the leather on his office chair before he started dismantling the culture we'd spent a decade building. He arrived with a binder full of efficiency targets, most of which sounded like they'd been pulled from a podcast about companies he'd never actually worked in. On his first day, he held a town hall where he talked for 43 minutes straight about strategic austerity and realigning internal value perceptions. Not once did he ask a single person in the room what we actually did. I watched him from the 3rd row, arms crossed, while he paced like a man rehearsing a speech he'd given 100 times before. He kept insisting Ridgepoint was bloated, sluggish, and losing its competitive edge, even though we'd just completed our strongest financial quarter in 6 years. Anyone who challenged him got the same sharp smile, the same condescending nod, the same implication that questioning him meant you were part of the inefficiency problem, and people felt it. Seasoned directors who had survived supply chain crashes and equipment failures suddenly tiptoed around their own departments, worried that the wrong budget line would get them labeled obsolete. Even Elijah, our CFO, practical, steady, diplomatic Elijah, stopped speaking up in meetings unless he had charts directly backing him. I realized quickly that Colton wasn't trying to learn Ridgepoint. He was trying to dominate it. He believed fear was a form of leadership, and that cutting costs was the same thing as growing revenue. I'd seen this mindset before, but never in someone who wielded so much unchecked authority. He called one-on-one meetings with every department head except me. Later, I learned why. He'd already pulled my compensation data and was planning to make an example out of me. Before that moment arrived, though, the warning signs were everywhere. Colton replaced our long-standing vendor review committee with a cost innovation panel, staffed entirely with people he'd worked with at his previous job, people who visibly flinched whenever he raised his voice. He slashed travel budgets for client maintenance trips, claiming everything could be handled through video calls, as if a frozen production line in Nevada could be fixed by someone staring at a laptop in Denver. He ordered restructuring drafts from every major division, but insisted they leave the executive comp section blank. "We'll handle that separately," he'd say, tapping his pen against the table like he was waiting for applause. During every meeting, his eyes flicked around the room searching for his next target, someone he could challenge publicly to prove he was raising performance standards. It was only a matter of time before he pointed that spotlight at me. The irony was painful. He claimed to value results, but never once asked how our biggest accounts survived multiple national supply chain breakdowns. He claimed to value accountability, but never admitted he didn't understand how relationship-based revenue actually functioned. Instead, he treated Ridgepoint like a failing startup he'd been hired to rescue, rather than a thriving logistics engine built on years of trust. I should have been angrier than I was, but mostly I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. Men like Colton always pick the wrong battle, and for reasons they never see coming. He wasn't just about to misjudge me. He was about to misjudge the 141 clients who trusted me more than the logo on the building. The morning of that executive meeting felt wrong before I even sat down. There was a stiffness in the air, a quiet dread that clung to the walls like humidity before a storm. Colton's assistant handed out printed agendas that looked more like warning notices, topics like compensation recalibration, market-aligned restructuring, and cost responsibility audit. I took my usual seat near the center of the table, the same spot I'd occupied for years, surrounded by colleagues who had weathered every crisis with me. But instead of familiar nods or morning greetings, I got quick glances, tight-lipped smiles, and a few eyes that slid away like they didn't want to be caught watching. Colton strutted in 5 minutes late, a practice delay he used to ensure everyone noticed his entrance. He wasn't carrying notes or files, just a remote control for the presentation screen. I felt the first twist in my stomach when the lights dimmed and a slide titled "Operational Efficiency Through Strategic Compensation Realignment" appeared. Not a single person moved. "Let's begin," Colton said, flipping to a chart of Ridgepoint's salary structure. His voice had that airy confidence of someone rehearsing a speech designed to shock. Ridgepoint's compensation model is misaligned with industry expectations. We are paying significantly above market in several executive areas, and it's affecting our margins. He tapped the remote again. And there it was, my full compensation package, my base, my bonus structure, my total cost breakdown, all projected larger than life behind him like an indictment. But it wasn't the numbers that stunned me. It was the bold text across the top. Overcompensated by 55%. The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. The silence said enough. My pulse hammered in my ears as 19 executives turned toward me with the same expression. Part sympathy, part horror, part fear that they might be next. "Harlow Dane," Colton said, as if introducing a budget item instead of a human being, "earns $355,000 annually. Market analysis indicates this role should fall between $200,000 and $220,000. He clicked again. A new slide popped up showing my proposed corrected compensation. A 39% cut, reduced bonuses, removal of benefits, my value rewritten in a font size and 18. This, Colton continued, is the kind of inefficiency we must correct if we're going to bring Ridgepoint back to competitive levels. Elijah shifted in his chair. I could feel him wanting to intervene, but I also knew why he didn't. Challenging Colton publicly was suicide, and that was the point. Colton wanted witnesses. He wanted to win a fight I hadn't agreed to be part of. "Colton," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I would like to discuss compensation privately. This is not appropriate for an executive forum." He flashed the kind of smile men use when they believe they've cornered someone. "This isn't personal, Harlow. This is about financial discipline. Emotion has no place in cost analysis. Emotion, as if the trust of 141 clients was a mood swing, as if the stability of more than $500 million in annual revenue was a feeling. Your compensation, he continued, addressing the room, is a symbol of outdated practices. Every executive believes they're worth more than the market says, but benchmarks don't lie. Yes, they do, I thought. They lie every time someone treats humans like replaceable variables. Your role, he added, turning back to me, is administrative. Relationship management can be handled by any qualified operations lead. I felt the sting of that word, administrative. I'd pulled factories back from the brink of shutdowns. I'd rebuilt entire logistics systems that had saved companies hundreds of millions. I'd flown across the country at midnight more times than I could count to fix situations someone else had broken. And somehow that was administrative? "What's your proposal?" I asked. My voice had gone very calm, cold, detached, the kind of calm that comes right before the end of something. Colton clicked one last time. "Accept this adjustment by Monday morning," he said, "or we'll need to consider alternative arrangements." The lights came back up. He moved on like nothing had happened, but he had made one fatal mistake. He thought he'd embarrassed me. He thought cutting my pay would force me into submission. What he didn't understand was that humiliation is not containment. It's ignition. And he had no idea what he'd just set in motion. I walked out of that conference room with my pulse steady, not shaking the way Colton probably expected. Humiliation can crack people open, but in my case, it clarified everything. 13 years of loyalty had been reduced to a slide deck, a